Wow.
Wow.
Wow, indeed.
We're back.
It has been a while, but we are finally back.
Yes.
Well-
Episode 4
Absolutely.
of the Retro Review Crew.
Yes. Welcome,
Man.
everybody who's been hanging in there and waiting for us return, but we have been working. And
We have.
Working on our latest conquest here. Quest 64. Again, my name is Travis, and this is Matt.
I'm Matt Hurls, and wow, yeah, it's been a long time. We are sorry for that. Life was kind of crazy the past year, at least for me.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, video game time kind of went down a little bit.
Yes. We kept at it. It was just a lot, a lot of gaming to play, but a lot more spread in between gaming sessions.
Right. We were teasing this game for probably the last at least 2 shows.
Yes.
Maybe 3.
It's possible. We could go all the way back to the beginning.
Wow, yeah. But, Quest 64, that is what we are going to be reviewing today.
Yes.
So, yeah, there's a lot to go over because this game is a lot. I mean, it's kind of long, not too long, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yeah,
A lot of different
aspects to it.
areas and enemies and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
all right, let's kind of go into the history of the game.
Yes.
So I'm just going to pull up the Wikipedia page because it's the easiest way to do it.
Absolutely. Give us
All right.
some info.
Yeah, let's
background story.
Let's talk about Quest 64. So, Quest 64 is a single-player role-playing video game developed by Imagineer and published by THQ. We all know THQ.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, made famous for the wrestling video games.
Yes, so
for
good.
sure.
Loved their games on N64 in general. This game is an amazing one, Quest 64. All the different WCW and WWF wrestling games, including, No Mercy. So many good games. And they also made some other fun titles too, but those are the ones that always jump out at me when I think THQ.
Yeah, they definitely kind of had that wrestling vibe, kind of.
Absolutely.
Made a lot of games for the N64, basically.
They really did, yeah. It's one of my favorite video game companies there, and especially back then when I was playing all the classic N64 titles.
That's right. That's right. So it was released for the Nintendo 64 in 1998. To be specific, in North America, it was released June 1st, 1998.
Wow.
It was released a little later in Europe, September 30th, 1998. And in Japan, it was released July 9th, 1999, believe it or not.
That's, usually, especially around this area, you figure if a game is going to come out first, it would come out in Japan first.
You would think.
Interesting,
And
yeah.
I do know the Japanese version is quite different, actually.
Oh, interesting.
It has more things to it because it was released later
On,
so.
Sure.
Yep. So, it was the first role-playing video game released for the system in the United States. After Quest 64's moderate financial success, a sequel was in consideration by the developer Imagineer. However, only the sequel's story was revealed before it was ultimately canceled. Imagineer released 2 other related games for the Game Boy Color. It was Quest, Brian's Journey, and a maze game called Quest Fantasy Challenge.
Interesting. Yeah, never saw either of those, never was able to play either of those, but sounds interesting.
Yeah, it does. And this one actually starts the whole story, per se, so...
Yeah, gets things rolling.
Yeah. So the game, the setting is, the game story is set in Keltland, a fantasy medieval world that resembles Ireland, believe it or not.
Ah, makes sense
Yeah.
with the word Celt in there.
Right.
Interesting.
So I don't want to get in too much from the gameplay because we're going to talk about that in depth.
Absolutely.
But we can talk about the development of the game. The game was announced in early 1997, at which point it was to be titled L-Tale. L-Tale in Japan and Holy Magic Century in all other regions. It was exhibited at Space World in 1997. Because the North American and PAL releases of the game were considered too short and easy, Imagineer added new events and tightened some of the repetitive gameplay for the game's Japanese localization, sorry. Expectations were high for the game, as in 1998 when the game was released, the Nintendo 64 didn't have any RPGs.
Yes.
And that's something to really talk about.
Oh, absolutely. RPGs have always been one of my bread and butter kinds of games growing up. Super Nintendo, I played so many RPGs, and that was like my go-to kind of game. So that was one thing that I always remembered when the N64 came out, was there wasn't really anything to choose from, in the RPG category. So when Quest 64 came out, that was awesome that they started going into that genre that I kind of grew up on.
That's just kind of crazy how the N64 really lacked RPGs.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just because of the whole, stepping up from 16-bit to 64-bit.
Sure.
It may have been an adjustment period there. And really, if you think about it, it was the last system to feature cartridges.
Yeah.
So
after that, we were moving on to CD or discs rather, and
discs
everything
and
like that.
CDs, basically the entire till even today.
Right. You had some systems like the Game Boy Advance and the DS that still use cartridges of a type, but yeah, it became more and more, CDs, discs, and things like that, and kind of, harkens back to those days when we were growing up playing games where you had to take a cartridge out and blow on it if it wasn't working, or,
Gets a little dusty.
Absolutely. It was part of the charm of video games.
Right. Just blow on it and,
hope for the
it
best.
works. Yeah. No kidding. I actually had to do that a couple times playing this, so.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I guess the history on this with me is I never played it back in the day.
Yeah.
I always remember seeing the cover because it has a very cool cover art,
Oh, absolutely.
It sticks out. So
yeah, you got Brian, our main character, the mage, there casting a spell, where some monsters are all around him there, getting ready to do some questing.
Yes, exactly. So
yeah,
when I saw this game in the video game store, the classic video game store,
yes,
that I live by, fortunately, it was one I had to pick up. I was like, let's do this. Let's give it a shot because I had a lot of there was a lot of mystique for me about this game.
Oh, absolutely. I actually did play it back then. I never owned it, but I did rent it from probably Blockbuster Video back in the day, and I really enjoyed it, but never picked it up afterwards. I played it for a while and then had to return it. And then never rented it again, but so when you were bringing it up that you had it, and we were talking about possibly playing it again, and I saw it at that same store, got myself a copy too, and it was off to the races. So, yeah, it was something I had a little bit of experience with back when it was sitting around in the local Blockbuster, but something I'd never really gotten in depth with. So this was awesome to go back and get to play more of it and kind of relive some of those early experiences I had with it.
Yeah. So first, so you pop the game in,
yes,
and we've played the intro music already for you. You heard it.
Gave a little sampler there for everybody.
Why don't you kind of tell the basis of the game, the storyline?
Sure. So you have the game that's starting in the land of Keltland. Brian is kind of a young wizard's apprentice, learning the tricks. His dad is a kind of famous wizard who is going out to find someone who has stolen the L-Tale book from the monastery where they live, or where they're being trained or whatnot. So it was basically a whole world of peace and everything. Somebody has stolen the book that has like untold kind of power that can throw the whole world into chaos. So Brian's dad went after trying to retrieve that book, but he's been gone for several months, and there's been no sign of him or of the book or anything of that nature. So Brian talks to the Grand Abbot of the Melroad Monastery, where he's at, and finds out that he has to go look for his dad and look for that book because the world's in danger. So Yeah, heavy start there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people in the Melroad Monastery that kind of warn you about how the going outside of a town is dangerous because you run into things.
Absolutely.
So,
There's monsters and all kinds of chaos in the world with the elements themselves to a degree revolting against humanity and everything with removal of the book and all these different kinds of gems that go together.
yeah, it kind of turns the world upside down pretty
Absolutely.
much without that darn book. So,
I know, that friggin' book, I tell you. So basically, your job then is to go find the book, figure out what's going on, and along the way, you are looking for different items, different gems, different kinds of jewels that are associated with each of the four elements: fire, wind, earth, and water. So you have a big theme of that in the game. You're going out and starting in different areas and going to different areas that are associated more with certain elements. Every enemy in the game, well, there's a few exceptions, but the vast majority of enemies in the game are associated with a certain type of element. So one of those four elements that we just kind of went over. And likewise, your character, Brian, the mage, gets to pick different kinds of spirits, they're called, to specialize in different elements of magic. So that's one of the areas where the game kind of gives you a little bit of customization with your character. Fire, earth, wind, and water all have different advantages and disadvantages. And when you get to kind of pick, and you can put points into any of them, you could focus completely on one element if you really wanted to, or you could focus kind of spread evenly among everything. It makes it kind of a interesting concept to the game. And knowing what magic works well against certain other enemies, knowing what elements that certain enemies have can give you an idea of what's strong against them. There's kind of have that opposite side to them. Water and fire oppose each other, and earth and wind oppose each other. So if you're facing like a fire enemy, having water magic is helpful. If you're facing like an earth enemy, having wind magic is helpful. It does a little more damage and puts you in a better position to be able to win. So, as you fight battles in this game, you can get more experience, and when you get a certain amount of experience, you get a level up, which is traditional in most RPGs. The only difference here is that instead of like having all these different parameters go up, you get to pick a element and then put a point into that. And as you get more of that, your spells do more damage of that element. You get additional spells that you can use. So some stuff that are just like damaging to enemies, some things like healing your character or raising certain stats. So the whole system of the elements is very big in this game, very key, and very helpful to plan ahead when you go in some of these long, dark dungeons where you can't get out too easily, and you have to know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. Sometimes you have to stick and fight a battle and you're down to almost no health, and sometimes you just got to run because you're going to be dead otherwise. What are your thoughts on the element system of the game?
So I enjoyed it. I thought it was fairly easy, actually. Some RPGs are very complicated. Sometimes you got to go down this path or you got to go down this path. But I thought this was real simple.
Yeah.
Real straightforward, to the point. I think someone who's just picking up the game would find this system pretty basic.
Sure.
Because you don't really pick any of your spells. They just kind of show up the further along you go with that element.
Right.
So I want to go into what were the elements that you focused on.
So for me, I kind of went with the two element system as far as having one that was my primary and one that I kept kind of close behind in secondary. And then the other ones I would put some points here and there. But so my main element was wind for me. I liked wind a lot. I like the idea of being able to hit a lot of enemies with multiple attacks, especially with wind. One of the nice things is you don't really have to even be looking at the enemy with some of the wind cutter spells, things like that just home in on the enemy. So a lot of times if I was in a position where I'm running from an enemy and just staying out of their reach as much as I can, I could hit them with a lot of different damage. And wouldn't even have to be looking in their direction. Because sometimes that was a tricky thing with the game, is targeting and making sure you're hitting an enemy, because you could think you're lined up, and have something go right by him and miss. So wind was my favorite, very useful. And then my secondary one was water, primarily because I knew it gave me the healing spells. And I found myself constantly healing myself after battles, trying to get myself up to as much HP as I could, and then walking around to get my MP back. So that was kind of my 1-2 punch there. Later on in the game, I started putting more into earth, and then a little bit into fire as well towards the end as I got closer to maxing the first 2 elements out. But yeah, wind because of the damage and not having to worry as much about aiming with certain spells, and water because I could heal, and that makes a big difference when you're trying to go through a long dungeon. How about you? What elements did you go with?
So the ones I went with earth.
Yes.
It was one. I didn't want to go with one that I thought was just going to be fire water. I wanted to try something that maybe didn't seem so exciting.
Sure. Yeah.
But boy, was I wrong. Earth was great.
Yeah.
It's actually, I think, one of the strongest elements you can get in the game. Cause
it's hard to disagree with that. Yeah, seeing what it does, some of its spells, especially some of its later game spells that you get.
It's insane. Yeah.
Like those barrier spells that can cut damage in half.
Goodness. Yeah. And then I went with water as well. I had no idea about the healing when I picked it, but I was so happy I did.
Glad you did, yeah.
So I went earth, water, just basically went back and forth.
Right.
And then when I maxed those out, then I tried the other ones, but I might have got like halfway through them. And that was it.
It was kind of like tinkering around with the other ones for me too, fire and earth in my case. So I never really got very far up the ladder with them, but it was more like, well, let's see what pops up here, what spells they have on here, because it gives you a lot of versatility when you do more than just one element, and that you're gonna max out on one anyway. So
right,
it's nice to have that kind of 2-element system.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess like the first thing I kind of noticed when I started playing this was, we're kind of, it brought me back into the N64 kind of nostalgia, basically.
Oh, sure.
The game kind of reminded me at first, when I first popped it in, of Zelda Ocarina of Time, obviously.
Sure.
Very, the camera angles, it took a little bit to get used to.
Yeah.
Obviously. You really want to use that B button to know where,
Absolutely.
to know where you're going, because it helps.
I feel like that's a common issue on a lot of N64 games, and even PlayStation, the first PlayStation, a lot of the games on there is on any kind of platforming thing. You would have a lot of issue with the camera until you got used to how to move it around, because it would a lot of times seem to go exactly right where you didn't want it to. So learning how to kind of move that, like you said, with the B button is huge.
It really is, because you're going to go into a lot of different towns.
Yes.
And some of them are really designed kind of crazy. They're up on a hill or a mountain, and the walkway isn't that wide. It's pretty narrow, so you really gotta
it can be confusing at times which way you can go, and sometimes just which way you've already gone in a town.
Right.
And I'm like the kind of person who likes to explore every part of the map, every little bit. So
same here.
And then I find myself going into the same building like 5 times while I'm in a town, and I'm like, okay.
And it's very easy to do.
It is.
Even if you're not if you're someone who just wants to beat the game as fast as you can,
right,
you're still probably going to go in circles in this game.
Oh, absolutely.
Quite often.
In towns and in dungeons.
Yeah.
And that's the most frustrating part sometimes, when you think you're getting close to the end of a dungeon and you realize you turned around somewhere and went right back to the entrance.
And exactly. And the one thing that that you find out later, or at least I did, I noticed that after you're done with a fight, it actually puts you back in the direction you were originally going. And we'll kind of get into that as we go more.
Yeah,
but
little tricks like that, little quirks about the game can help you immensely.
Yes, definitely. So kind of once you leave the monastery, you kind of go off into your own.
Right.
And you start kind of going down the path.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you go to the Holy Plains.
Right.
So you kind of get a familiarity how this works. Basically, once you leave towns, You go into battles basically all the time.
Yes.
All the time.
They go with a random a random battle system that especially people who are familiar with like the earlier titles in the Final Fantasy series will know. They pop out of nowhere, and sometimes they feel like they're happening just rapid fire one right after the other. You move like 4 steps and you're in another fight.
Yes. Yes.
So you'll get used to the battle system very quickly because you don't really have a choice.
Yeah. And you're going to get in a lot of battles. In some term in gaming they call grinding.
Yes.
You know, you do that a lot in like MMOs a lot.
Absolutely. A lot of the Final Fantasy games and things like that where you have to do a lot of grinding to level up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes to get certain items, sometimes and just to work on your stats so that you don't get your butt kicked by the next boss you fight.
Right. And you can run away from battles,
yes.
But sometimes the thing about when you enter a battle, you kind of get like this battle area. Like think of it as like a circle.
Kinda. It's almost like a kind of like a grid or kind of like a wrestling or boxing ring in a way where you're encased in that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it has part of like 2 kind of rings or circles. I guess I don't really know what the best way to say it is. But there's like a yellow one, which is the whole area that both you and the enemies can move around in. And then there's like a white one that's like your exit ring. And then there's also kind of like a little area. So if you go into that exit ring, if you can make it there, it'll get you out of the combat once your turn's done. They also will show you a little kind of another smaller ring around Brian that just shows you where he can move that turn.
Yes.
So there's like a lot of rings within rings. It's like Inception with rings.
The white one is basically your main ring where the battle can occur.
Right.
And then everything in that ring is based off of moves and enemies' movement. And whatnot. So
and you'll get to see kind of like the area that you can move in, and then when it's the enemy's turn, you'll see it like go in there. So it shows you like what they can move around in as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of get a feel for how far they usually can move if you're trying to stay just out of range, or if you want to just book it and get out of there too.
You can do that. I mean, you can do that. My approach throughout the game was a little half and half. When I was out on the terrain, I would fight some of the battles, but some of them I would just run away because, you know, you're going to fight a lot of battles in dungeons.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and you're going to want to look for everything in dungeons.
Right.
So I was like, well, I'm here already. I might as well just fight unless I was about to die or something.
Right.
So.
Yeah, there's times where I would like run and just try to heal myself up a little bit, and then when my turn came out, get right out of there.
Yes,
because the battles are relentless in like how frequent they can happen, especially in a dungeon or where you're trying to make headway and you can keep getting caught into stuff. So the game is just more like relentless with the combat than necessarily individual battles being ridiculously difficult. It's almost like you have to manage your resources. Even though you have ways of recovering, primarily like the healing spells and healing items, still you can run out, you can burn through your supplies pretty quickly if you're not prepared, if you don't know where you're going, or if you're just trying to fight everything and anything.
Yeah.
Which ends up making things a lot more frustrating than they need to.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of why if you're playing this game and you just want to beat it, I say you definitely should pick water as one of your elements because it has healing, and you're going to need it because you'll burn through your items pretty quick if you don't.
Oh, yeah. And you want those big items from those boss battles because a lot of those big healing items, are really the only way of staying ahead of the damage you're being dealt. Like trying to do like a level 1 water healing spell in a big battle, like with one of the big bosses and later in the game, isn't going to get you very far.
No.
So you want to have those healing items for that, and that's especially where the water magic, the healing spells become a lot more effective in just kind of keeping your health up, especially between battles. When you don't want to be burning through all those healing supplies you might have otherwise.
Yeah, and that's why I really enjoyed water as we went throughout the game.
Absolutely.
So basically with the Holy Plains, not really any much to talk about in the Holy Plains.
No.
Just your familiarity with the battle scene.
Right.
With the battle mechanics. It is an RPG, so you pick the move you want. It's not like a action adventure game where you
Right.
run and you know it's real time
And,
basically.
yeah, I was gonna say, and the nice thing about it with this is that it's a turn-based combat system. So, like you said, it's not real time. It's not like where you have to try to try to run around everything, try to beat everything in a quick succession. You have a chance to figure out, okay, these are the parameters. These are where my enemies are. It's my turn. Where do I want to move to? What kind of attack do I want to do? And then after you go, then your opponent goes. Mm-hmm. And the nice, interesting thing about this game, too, is that it alternates between your turn and all the enemies. So you go, one of the enemies goes, you go again, a different one of the enemies goes, and they kind of alternate through that. The only time that an enemy will go, like you go, one enemy goes, you go, that same enemy goes, is if they're the only enemy left.
Yes.
So that is also something that gives you a little bit of strategy. If you know, like, the one that's closest to you just went and hit you hard, you can kind of have an idea of, okay, this other one way in the back is going to be going next, so they're going to probably do a different kind of attack, and I might change my strategy a little bit of what I want to do.
And every move in this game counts for some stat, which is really cool.
Yes.
If one of your enemies tries to hit you but he misses, well, you get a stat for agility. Then
Right.
it goes up. It helps go up, I should say. It doesn't always go up,
Right.
But
it works towards that increase.
It does. It does. Every time you take damage, you're gaining stats, which is really cool.
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. When you're casting spells, hitting people with your staff, different things are going up each time, which is really nice.
And the thing I really did love about this game, if you happen to die, which I did quite a few times.
Oh, me too.
Your stats are saved. It's not
Yes.
like you go back to before when you died. That you gain everything you gain in the game.
Yeah.
You gain pretty much forever as long as you hit the save button.
Right.
After you die, it's still there.
Which is one of the really nice things, especially when you go through a long winding dungeon that you've spent you maybe a half an hour plus in, and then you get caught off guard, you die, you go back to where you last saved the game, but you still, like you said, keep all the progress you've made, all your stat gains. You do lose any items that you may have used since that last save, but it's worth it.
a lot of items you can get from the towns you're in too.
Yes.
So that's really huge.
There's treasure chests kind of scattered throughout the game, in a lot of towns, a lot of dungeons, which a lot of times will have healing items. And then even like you were saying, in some of the towns, there's certain like pubs that you can go to in different towns where people will be able to give you certain items. Mm-hmm. There's one of the interesting things about this game too, as kind of a side, is that there's no like money system, which is very rare for an RPG. Usually a lot of the grinding in games is trying to get enough money so that you can buy your best weapons, your best equipment, all this stuff. This game takes a different approach. The people at these pubs will actually give you certain items. Sometimes it'll be like a healing item, a specific one, or well, usually it's a healing item, I suppose.
Right.
For either your magic or for your health points, your hit points. But if you don't have that item, or if you've been using all your items and you don't have, like, let's say a honey bread or something like that they would normally offer you there, if you don't have it, they will give you one, which is really nice.
That is nice. I think if this is a game, now this is a game where it could throw some people off because you are grinding quite a bit.
Yes.
Very long. But if I'm going to say an RPG for beginners, this might be one game I would do it because there's not a lot you have to do.
Right.
As far as like thinking, like you don't have money, so you don't really have to worry about items. All the items you get, you find basically.
Right.
You don't have to worry about saving all the time because you keep your stats even after you die.
Yes.
You don't really have to think too much about the elements.
No, you basically have 4 choices, and you pick one, and you get new spells that way. So
Exactly. And you can build all 4 at the same time. I don't recommend that, by the way.
Yeah.
But you could do it.
You could, absolutely. That would be
I
an
say
interesting
stick with
challenge.
2. That's kind of what I kind of found.
I think that's, a good idea. One of the interesting things, too, is because there's no, like, equipment as in most RPGs that I have played, you'll equip your character with like a weapon, so a sword, and then a helmet, armor, boots, all that fun stuff.
Yep.
And then you have to constantly, like throughout the game, be buying new ones, be finding new ones, and then remembering to equip them and changing stuff for the situation. One of the interesting things about this game is because it doesn't have the money system, because it doesn't have that equipment system, that's also something you don't have to really worry about. You're worried more about your intrinsic stats that you can raise through combat, raise through taking hits, raise through casting spells or attacking your enemies. And one of the interesting things about that is that it's kind of a relatively unique system. I've only seen a couple of games that have used a similar system where what you do or have done to you in combat is what increases your stats in that way. I can think of like Final Fantasy 2 or Final Fantasy Legend on the Game Boy, and both of those games had something similar to where like if you did certain actions, those would increase your stats in that area. So just another unique thing. Like it takes a lot of different things about RPGs and simplifies them so that you can focus on different aspects. And like you were saying, I think that's what makes it a great beginner title for people who are interested in the RPG genre. Not because that's not challenging, because there's definitely moments where it can be challenging, but because it takes out a lot of the overwhelmingness that can hit somebody that's new with the genre that might not be familiar with a lot of those different areas.
Yes, exactly, definitely. So let's go into. We're not going to talk about every town because I don't think the towns are really all that important.
Not really.
You're going to get a storyline, a small one, and generally every time you go into a new town, they're going to give you the storyline about who the upcoming boss is going to be for that area.
Who's been messing with the town folk?
Yes. Yeah. Very repetitive that way.
Yes.
Yep.
And towns, they're fun to walk through and talk to people, but you really rarely get any like groundbreaking information from the townspeople.
Yeah.
Most of the time you're going to like the inn there to rest and save your game. You go to the shops to get whatever the color wings are in that town. Like in the first town, or I should say the first town, I think it's in Mellower, it's white wings, and then when you go to Donderon, it's yellow wings, and all different wings like that. And they basically just let you, when you use that item, go back to that town.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be nice to get out of a jam, or if you're thinking, I need to get to this different area, and you've been doing a lot of backtracking, and you just want to jump back forward. It could be helpful that way.
That is really cool. If you need to go somewhere really fast, you always have those wings. Now remember, you cannot use wings in dungeons.
Right.
But you can use them in the open areas whenever you want, which is very helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you don't want to walk all the way back, especially when you got you're going to run into probably hundreds of enemies in that time.
You'll be pulling your hair out so it's good to have those.
Yeah.
And then again, like in most towns, there's those pubs that we were saying where you can go in, and if you don't have a certain item that they are offering there, they will give you one.
Yes.
So like fresh bread or dewdrops, things like that. And then a lot of the bigger towns will have like a castle where you'll go meet with whichever like the king or queen is in that town, and they'll give you more information again on the local bad guy coming up that you have to defeat.
Yes. So it's pretty basic that way. The storyline is pretty basic throughout the game. Yeah. I mean, it kind of continues that.
Right.
But so let's kind of go through the dungeons, I guess.
Sure.
So you go to Donderon Castle, and then you go to the Connor Fortress.
Right.
Which is the first dungeon you go into.
Yes.
Correct? Yes.
And it is kind of a spooky kind of feel to the forest, especially if you go in at night, which I did.
It does. And yes, the cool thing about this game is it goes through like real times of the day.
Right.
So it goes from morning to night to PM to, just as the sun's setting. It's pretty cool that way.
Yeah, it gives you just a different kind of feel.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the fun things about when you go into a different dungeon like that is it can give you a whole different kind of feel to it. If you go into one in the daytime, everything seems cheery, easier to see. If you go in, like, the Connor Fortress, for instance, in night, it can make it a little trickier to see things and trickier to figure out your direction. Okay. But this being the first dungeon that you go to...
It's hard.
Yes.
It's very hard.
I probably spent, like, 45 minutes in this dungeon because I kept getting turned around.
Yes.
And I kept getting frustrated.
You don't really know the aspects of the game before you go into this.
Right.
So you're not going to, we didn't spend a ton of time in the Holy Plains, grinding and getting our stats up.
Yeah.
So you go into the Connor Fortress, you're dealing with enemies that are way more powerful than you thought. And not only that, like you said, you can get lost in there very easily.
Yes, and keep going. I'm like, how do I get through this area? I keep turning around. I keep running to the same freaking gate or something.
This, it's crazy. I think Is honestly, if I'm remembering it, this might be one of the toughest dungeons.
Right, just because you're
Just
getting used to the
because.
concept of the way this game handles dungeons.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, such a big thing is knowing how the game reacts with the way it positions you after a fight. Knowing one of the reasons I think that I liked Wind so much before I realized this is because I would literally like not want to turn around at all because I'd be so afraid that I would get going in the wrong direction. So with Wind, I would just make sure I was still facing the same direction I was when I got into that fight, and then casting the Wind Cutter spells that home in on all the enemies.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that was that way, if I won the fight just doing that, I would still be facing in the same direction, and I didn't realize, like you were saying before,
You don't realize it in the beginning.
that you don't have to do that. As long as you finish the fight, it will turn Brian looking in the direction that you were when you went into the combat.
Yep, which
Yeah,
hindsight's 2020.
absolutely.
There.
When I
Yeah.
found out about that, my mind was kind of blown. I won't lie, because I was so freaked out about that because I was getting so annoyed. And we can't be spending 2 hours in a dungeon. We got lives outside
Yes.
video games too.
Yes.
Our wives probably wouldn't be too keen on that all the time.
Right. A lot of times I would play this game before I had to go to work. I'd wake up really early and just play because, if I went to bed early the night before, I kind of like just waking up early, playing some video games.
Right.
So when I did this, I was like, oh, Connor Fortress is so long.
Right.
But luckily I died a few times in here.
Well, that is actually kind of a blessing.
And
in
it was a
disguise,
blessing because then I could
the
save it
game.
there, and I kept all my stats, so it's like,
Yeah.
okay, fine.
Each time made it a little bit easier. Because you're building your
You're
character.
better.
up.
You're
Yeah.
better prepared, basically. So let's talk about the Counter Fortress. Yes, it's very hard to see in there. You can
Right.
get turned around pretty quickly. The enemies are definitely higher.
Yes.
Than you're used to. Who is the boss of the Counter Fortress?
The boss, our good friend. He's the first, he's the first boss of the game.
Yep.
I believe the name is Solvering or Solvering, something like that. Solvaring. He's the first boss of the game. You will actually be kind of surprised when you first fight him because he has a lot of hit points, 200 hit points to be exact. And at this point, you have nothing near that.
Yeah.
And he can kind of hit you a little harder than you would expect. So all the enemies in the game, including the bosses, with just a couple of exceptions, have an innate element that they are associated with. So Solvering is an earth boss. He takes extra damage from wind spells and takes a little bit less damage from earth spells. So, with me being primarily wind, it made this fight easier for me than I probably would have otherwise. How was it for you being an earth, being behind the earth factor there?
Yeah, so I used a lot of earth attacks against him.
Yeah.
I threw basically everything I had at him.
Yeah.
I had to use every item. I probably died at least 3-4 times before I beat him.
Yeah.
He was not easy because at the beginning he's very tough.
Yeah, you don't know what to expect when you're walking into your first boss fight.
Not at all. But any item I had, I remember using it on him.
Yeah.
And I pretty much, it was one of those things where we both were down to very minimal health, and I got the last hit and I was almost dead basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a very tough battle. I think the Counter Fortress in general was tough.
It was. You kind of walk into there thinking that you can just walk in there without being prepped and that it'll be all easy. But it wakes you up quite a bit.
It does, and plus all the grinding you have to do in the dungeon itself.
Absolutely. For me, Silvering, I believe, if I remember correctly, he did beat me the first time I faced him. I think he caught me a little bit off guard. Second time I was able to defeat him. Again, having a lot of wind damage was helpful. But a lot of bosses especially, I mean enemies in general, they'll have different attacks depending on how close they are to you or how far away. Silvering has an attack up close where he hits you with this, I think it was an earth attack that was basically has this big blast really close, and you couldn't really dodge that. In fact, that's kind of the case on most bosses, is that their close-up attacks are usually a lot more brutal than their far-away attacks.
Yes.
And a lot harder to dodge if...
you will notice that quite often throughout this game. Once you beat him, you do go back to the Counter Fortress.
Right.
Or you go back to Dondering Castle.
Right, because you get one of the 4 gems or whatever they're called. You get the Earth Orb, once you defeat Silverring, which is the thing that he stole.
Yes.
So you were going back to the castle to return that to the king.
And a lot of people are happy because now they can go through the forest.
Yes.
Because there's a couple of people that needed to use it and they couldn't use it. So.
Right, they couldn't go through because when you go through the counter fortress, there's a gate there that's closed. So part of the idea of going to get beat the robber and get the beat Silverring and get the Earth Orb is that the king will open that up for you so you can go through, which gets you to the next area, which is the Dondoran Flats.
Dondoran Flats, yep.
Yes.
Dondoran Flats, just another big area.
Similar to the Holy Plains and kind
very
of
similar. Yeah, you don't really notice much difference. And then you go to West Karma,
yes,
which is a new part of the game, correct?
Right, it's a whole different section.
A new whole section. So then you go to basically Larapool, which is the water city, I believe.
Right.
Okay, so that's actually a pretty cool city. One of my favorite cities, actually.
Yeah, it was
the
cool.
way it's designed.
Absolutely, and it's cool. You get to see like all the different fountains and just the style of it's very scenic. Really pulls you in.
It is, and I'll talk about it a little later in our review. But this game has some very visually pleasing moments to it. Some really cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed the way that they did a lot of the 3D rendering in the game. And
it's cool.
Yeah.
They made good use of it. I will definitely say that. So then pretty much after Larapool, you're back in, West Karma. The first dungeon you do in Karma is the Cull Hazard, I believe, correct?
Yes. So you go to the Cull Hazard.
I'm sorry, did I miss the Glencoe Forest? I think I
did. You did
because
it's one of those things that you don't have to go to. It's kind of optional. You can go to it early, which we both did because there's a lot of elemental spirits you can find in there.
Yes, tons.
Or it's something that you can come to a little bit later because story-wise, you don't have to stop there right after. But there's not a lot of reason not to.
Yeah, I remember the Glencoe Forest was a pretty cool looking. It's not as big as the Counter Fortress, correct?
Right.
But the Glencoe Forest, there's a ton of items in there that you want to get.
Yes.
And refresh my memory. Was the Glencoe Forest, did it have that cabin?
It did have a cabin.
Okay.
Yep.
I remember. Yeah, I think the Glencoe Forest is actually really cool. There's a lot of cool things you can get in there, so I definitely recommend doing it.
Yeah, I would go there before you continue on. Even if you don't have to go there yet, the spirits and the items and just the atmosphere. I'm kind of one of those guys, especially with my history of loving RPGs, that I will pretty much try to go everywhere ahead of time if I can.
Yeah,
try to push the limits of how they program things, even if maybe they didn't intend for you to go to it early. Sometimes it's kind of fun to see what you can do. And I think that Glencoe Forest has like 6 different spirits in it too. So
and you want to get spirits. They look like question marks, or they look like little white things floating up.
I know
in the
that. I always
sky.
think of them as like little question marks.
Anytime you go by it, you get another. You can use a point for one of your elements. So
and the game is kind of crafty sometimes about the way they try to hide it, like just out of view, sometimes behind like a stump or behind like a house.
Yes.
So you'll find yourself, especially if you get to the point where you want to find as many as you can, where you're looking all over the place. Sometimes, like even in the last dungeon of the game, when we got to that point, I was still looking behind every little thing, thinking maybe there's one hiding here.
And it's a nice way to build up your stats way quicker. So, and it's cool. Like if you like looking for things, it definitely keeps you busy. But keep in mind, you're going to be grinding your way to find them. So
in the whole game, you can get a total of I believe 200 spirits, and just a slightly under half of those can be found in the game, like on the maps. A little over half of it you get just from fighting enough battles. So you'll never be hurting for spirits, let me put it that way. You'll never be like, oh my gosh, why can't I get any? To get all 200 would be pretty impressive, but also not necessary.
I think I may have gotten like... I was looking at, the guides for a lot of these to find them, and I found quite a bit. I probably missed about maybe 10 to 15, maybe.
Yeah. I was going to say, because at the end of the game, I know we both had the one we started with, so like Earth for you, Wind for me maxed out, and then we both had Water maxed out at the end of the game, too.
We did.
So I think you ended up with a few more than I did at the end of the game. For the last ones that you hadn't that we hadn't maxed out. So, But yeah, we both did pretty good job of getting them. And once we had our two main elements maxed out, it was the other ones were more just kind of fun to see what else we could get.
Yeah, what else you could do? I don't even know if I used them, but
yeah, I
you know,
would try
use
them
some
every
of
once
it.
in a while.
Yeah, just see what they do.
I liked the fire power staff one because I ended up doing a lot of times where I would just start smacking enemies with the staff.
Mm-hmm.
So that without raising your attack, it's kind of fun to just go up there sometimes and just start, trading smacks with the enemy.
Yeah.
But yeah, Earth was cool too, but I didn't go far enough into it to get to a lot of those really cool spells.
Earth is really cool. I mean, there's a move called Avalanche. Oh my goodness, it's very random if it hits or not, but if it does hit, you can wipe out like 3 enemies in one turn. It's
just rocks enemies.
How good it is, and I also like. It's not Avalanche, but it's called Rolling Rock, I believe.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And it kind of like, if they're standing in a line and you do the Rolling Rock, you can hit all 3 of them.
Yeah,
so
it just sweeps across.
That's what I love doing that. So
yeah, there's some really cool spells. Like you would think that once you get like the first couple damage spells, you'd be like, whatever. I've seen them all, but they do a good job of giving you all kinds of different things, different arcs, different patterns, and then just kind of more ancillary spells, more assist kind of things. Like Earth has ones that can increase your defense, that can nullify even certain attacks, which is amazing. Fire can increase your attack. Water can do it where you can see like the stats of the enemies with the Soul Searcher spell, which is kind of cool, especially if you're not like looking online or something. Or if you see an enemy, you're like, okay, what element are they? Because I want to know what I can hit them with. Like the Soul Searcher spell will actually give you that
is cool.
information when they take their turn. Yeah. So that's nice, and obviously water has healing.
Yes.
Wind has a couple different cool spells. It has ones that'll increase like your agility or evade, and then one that I really like is one that can actually increase how far your character can move in the next couple turns.
That can be very useful. As
Absolutely.
Well. So do you okay? Cull Hazard. Refresh my memory. This is kind of It is. I don't remember what it looks like, but
it was one of the first dungeons that I remember feeling like it took forever to get through, because it's like a giant cave. It's a giant cave basically, and it is like it's narrow and it's very much like you're going down a straight way. The problem with that is that it's very like long, so it's very easy. If you had the issue like I did where I was getting turned around to feel like you're going all the way out and then walking all the way back to the
okay.
So that was the tough part. Some of the enemies weren't too bad, but like it has some of the big enemies like the Wyvern, so the big dragon looking guy.
This ain't the one that like a mining thing, is it?
It is, yes.
Okay, I do remember this one. I do. Okay, this one has the bat. You run into a lot of bats.
Yes,
too.
A lot of like the bats.
Yeah.
A lot of there's a couple different enemies that are weird, like the scarecrow enemy. That's just a giant crow.
Yeah.
And then like the jelly enemies. So it was interesting. There's definitely a lot of items in there that you can pick up. There's a couple spirits too. Spirits are kind of all over in the game.
This one, I mean, it's a long dungeon.
It is,
and it's huge.
It is.
It's really huge.
The nice thing is that there's not a boss at the end of it.
Yes.
It gets you from one town, basically kind of from one town to the next, and it gets you to the town of Normoon, which. If anyone's keeping count, you can get the green wings here at the pub.
Yes.
I don't know why. I just think
it.
It's funny that they all have a different color,
Right,
national color there.
Right.
So there's some spirits there in that town too, and some random items you can get. But basically, Normoon, the town, is positioned to get you to the next level, which is the Windward Forest.
Oh yes, this has some crazy visuals in this.
Yes,
in this
it does.
level. Like the long wood plank you're walking down, and it's just everything's kind of around you goes crazy. It's almost like, if I were to explain it, it's like one of those, you go out like Ripley's Believe It or Not, where you walk through the bridge and like you're in like a tunnel and it spins around you, so you think you're kind of getting dizzy.
Yeah, it gives you almost like a vertigo feel.
Yeah, a vertigo feel, right.
And it's such a cool area, and a lot of interesting enemies there. Everything from like, the spiders and the jack-o'-lanterns and different other kind of jelly. I just thought it was kind of cool the way that they set everything up in there. Now there's a lot of interesting enemies to fight. There's a couple of tough enemies. along the way, but you actually do have a boss at the end of this one. Unlike when we went through the Cull Hazard, this one will actually get you to the second boss of the game. I think my health was probably around like 100, 110 or something like that at this point. It's kind of hard to remember exactly, but just knowing that every time I had to fight a boss, I was always like, okay, how much health does this guy have? Because they usually seem to have a lot of health. And this boss, Zelsi, or Zels, I don't know if you pronounce the E at the end.
Yeah, I don't either.
Is no exception. He has 680 hit points and is of a wind element, which as a primary wind user, I was not too happy about that. You probably didn't have too much issue.
I did pretty good on
with
Zelsi, actually, compared to Solverine.
Yeah.
Oh man, this was. I mean, it was a long level to get there, but yeah. Definitely. I believe I beat Zelsi either in the first or second try, but by this time I had my healing pretty well. So if I really needed to, I could kind of evade and just keep healing.
Yeah.
So
it made for a very long battle with using a lot of wind spells. Now I don't think I lost to Zelsi, but it took a lot of items and a lot of spells. So it was a long battle, but she has kind of a weird mix of attacks. Like most enemies only have 2 attacks, and she actually has 3, depending on distance. So most enemies, is either you're really close to them, you get hit with 1 attack. You're really far away, they do another one. She has one where, like, if you're in like a middle range, she does like this big wall of what looks like lightning that comes out at you. So that was weird, that she had like 3 different ranges. Otherwise, if you're really far away, she had like one of those homing arrow kind of things that looks similar to spells that I think that we have seen before. And then like a big burst thing if you're close to her. So in general, don't get close to her,
right,
or him rather. If you're successful and able to defeat Zelsi, they drop the Wind Jade, which is the second of those 4 jewel-y things that you're trying to collect. And once you do that, you will head back out over to Larapool to talk to the folks there and learn, what's next on the agenda.
Yeah, and this is kind of a cool level that you go to. You go to the Blue Cave.
Oh, yes.
So you have to lower the water, right?
Which is very interesting.
Talk to someone. Yep. I believe one of your companions throughout the game, we should probably mention her.
Oh,
Shannon?
Yes, I was going to say Shannon.
Shannon?
Shannon, yeah.
Shannon.
She is a character that is reoccurring that you will see in pretty much every town, pretty much every time you go to any. I think she usually hangs out either in the inns or the pubs. I feel like it's the inns.
It's the inns.
Yeah.
Yep, it's always in the inns.
And
yep. She always tells you some information and whatnot. So
kind of direct you to where you need to go next.
She reminded me of in Pokemon when you're Ash.
Yeah.
And you run into your rival throughout the game.
Got you.
That's what she reminds me of.
I got you.
Yep.
She kind of looks a little bit to me like a character from Zelda named Impa.
Yes.
So she looks a little bit like that, especially just the way she's designed. But anyways, she's kind of mysterious. You don't really know what her whole deal is. You just know that she's giving you information and kind of pushing you in the direction you need to know. So, kind of a strange and mysterious ally at times. But anyways, Blue Cave.
Blue Cave.
Yes.
This was a really crazy level.
This might have been like one of the toughest. This or possibly even the fire dungeon that's coming up.
Yeah.
Are probably one of those 2 is probably the hardest one in the game. It's hard for me to say if it's this one or that one.
So the Blue Cave, is this the one where it has the really narrow winding paths where you have to find all the treasures and it's almost like a maze in itself?
Yes. It's almost like it's broken into 2 parts. One is like a big cave with a lot of areas you can turn and a lot of spirits to find. And then the second part is like that big maze with like a lot of platforms that you're kind of following and trying to figure out where to go, and also you want to get all the treasure. So
this was crazy, because you would see the treasure like 5 yards away from you, but you can't walk over to
it. You gotta go all
the way around and figure it out. That's pretty tricky. If you're a completionist like I am, I wanted to get everything. It took a while to get all the treasures.
Absolutely, and it's so easy when you're trying to get to the end of the cave. and trying to find treasures to turn yourself around and then end up realizing, oh crap, I've already gone down this stretch. I already got what's at the end of this particular part. Right. So it can be a long one. Honestly, this thing in total probably took me over an hour.
Yes. Very long level.
Through.
Very long level.
Yeah.
And that brings you to the Crystal Valley, which kind of looks kind of crazy with all these different colors.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the really cool aspects of the way they use the graphics and use that to make it a very scenic place.
Really cool visuals in this game. And then that kind of goes to the Isle of Skye, which is the boss battle.
Right. There's So when you're in Crystal Valley, you go because you're trying to find this woman named Epona, not the horse from Ocarina of Time, but same name. But and then she kind of gives you the information, and you go onto the ship. You take a teleporter, I should say, in her little cottage in the Crystal Valley that takes you to the boat. Yes. And then the boat takes you to the Isle of Skye.
Yes.
And that's where you get to run into the next boss, the third of the bosses that have the different gems. This one is Nepti, who is the water boss, and she comes in with a stout 880 hit points, which again is like comical when you look at your own hit points, which are like 120, 130, something like that. Yeah. But tell me about your experience with Nepti. I had no
problems with Nepti.
Yeah.
I finished her pretty quick. I just did Earth. Earth. I was using my rock attack. I think I had 3 by this point.
Yeah.
If I didn't have 3, I had 2 for sure. But, oh, gosh, it was just rock attack. Yeah. I got her first try easily.
Yeah, I don't remember having much of an issue with her either. I just kind of stayed away from her and just kept hitting her shredding her up with wind cutter and stuff like that. I don't think she killed me at all. She just had a lot of hit points, so it took a while.